Hey everyone, RogueGold here, welcome back to the Division 2, and today, it's been a minute, we need to talk some Survivors. In case you did not know, Survivors is an upcoming mode and content release for the Division 2 that is set to reimagine winter survival in the franchise, just as the survival mode first explored back in the Division 1. Now, one thing that I think we can pretty safely bet on, assuming it ships in a good state, that is that Survivors is going to be popular amongst Division players, or at least Division players who enjoy that type of mode and experience. And I say that for one because the hunger for it is still there, right? There is no way that this would have gotten greenlit 10 years after the original Survival if not for that community passion. But then also because the deck it has is pretty stacked, right? They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. This is head out into the blizzard and survive just like OG Survival, as well as the team behind it knows their stuff, with original Division 1 creative director Magnus Jansen at the helm of the project, longtime Division vet Andrada Graychuk serving as game director. Those elements alone leave very little room for error, and I think the recipe for success is laid out quite plainly. However, part of what I want to dive into today is that I'm becoming increasingly curious with how Survivors may be received by the wider gaming audience. And that is for a couple of reasons, one of the big ones being, this is an extraction shooter mode and game loop being created. OG Survival released at a time before such labels existed, right? It had extraction elements, but there were also some flavors of Battle Royale and straight up survival sim in there. That said, it has been pretty clearly communicated that Survivors is full-on extraction, and in some cases they've even gone back to state definitively that OG Survival was too, like in this clip from ex-executive producer Julian Garrity.
What is Survivors to you?
So, Division 1, we had 3 DLCs, and we had the fan favorite, which was Survival. And Survival was, before it was even a word, it was an extraction shooter.
I was going to say, you guys really beat the wave here we've seen now.
I mean, if I hear one single person in the chat saying that Ubisoft only chases trends, I'm going to be disappointed because this was before it was even a thing.
Now, if you're maybe not keyed into this kind of stuff, just saying the words extraction shooter these days can rile some people up. Looking at the industry as a whole, after the Battle Royale well began to dry up a few years back in terms of novelty and excitement for new titles, publishers began looking for that next thing, that next genre craze to capitalize on, and for better or worse, their sights landed on the extraction shooter. And so for a long time we watched as a mad dash played out to see who could be the first or among the first to release a more broad appeal mainstream extraction shooter to captivate audiences. For a while, frontrunners looked to be the likes of the Division's own Heartland spin-off title, rest in peace, as well as projects like The Last of Us Online. Both of those ended up being cancelled, though, and while there are many more I could reference, there's really only one name that rises above the rest, and that is Ark Raiders. It released in October of last year to mass audience and critical acclaim. It sold basically all of the copies. It was a smash hit. Since Ark launched, though, the tone and attitude around the extraction genre really seems to have shifted. Among others, you've had releases like Marathon come about, which saw some success, but overall seemed to struggle to grab people as much as Ark did. That said, Marathon joins a growing number of studios and IPs working on titles for this genre. And so for many players out there, it's just kind of reached the point of saturation. They don't care what the next extraction shooter is when there's 20 others that launched in the past 6 months alone. And I think this was best exemplified recently when it was reported that even the likes of Halo is being considered for an extraction shooter. So, bringing this all back around to Survivors, even though Division has a better claim than nearly anyone in this genre, given they planted their stake a decade ago with Survival, that does not change the fact that for many people out there, this genre has simply reached oversaturation. But, that said, I mentioned that there are a couple of reasons as to why I'm curious how Survivors will be received outside the existing Division audience. Another major one is because of what Survivors is bringing to the table. Part of the reason for people feeling that aforementioned oversaturation is because many of these games releasing are trying the exact same formula, most notably by having PvP on by default across all modes and maps. Survivors has already plainly said that they're not doing that. It's been communicated for some time now that just like the original Survival, you can play Survivors in dedicated PvE or PvP lobbies, meaning if you do not want to fight other players, you don't have to. And that is a step that even Arc Raiders, arguably the biggest success story in this genre, has not taken despite many requests for a PvE mode from the player base. And so I don't think it can be understated how appreciated many players out there will find that to be. Is that alone enough to make Survivors stand out? Could it be the thing that attracts Extraction and non-Division players from all across gaming to come and try it out? I don't know, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. There's then the matter of how all of this is being presented and pitched, right? I'm coming in here framing this as, will Survivors make a splash in the gaming world? But, as we know, this is not a new game like Heartland was pitched to be. This is an add-on to an existing 7-year-old Division 2. And if it's anything like the original Survival, that wasn't really aimed at anyone other than existing Division players. Given it was a paid DLC add-on, you played with your main existing character, you earned rewards to be used back in the main game. This time around, though, with Survivors, we have some evidence to suggest that things may be different. For one, Survivors has its own dedicated dev team, like previously mentioned with Magnus and Andrada, and so while nothing is yet confirmed, that could hint at this having a much larger scope and budget compared to other modes previously released for the Division 2, right? Experiences like Countdown or Descent that were made by the game's core live content team. That also raises the question, though, how exactly does this fit into the larger Division 2? There was an interesting detail dropped during a developer AMA conducted back in March that confirmed that unlike original Survival, Survivors will allow for us to create brand new characters to play it. So naturally, that leads to the question of, will this really have any tie-in or connection to the base game, or will it serve as a more isolated, complete, and standalone experience, just still being under the Division 2 umbrella? I've seen a number of community theories arise that this could be handled very similarly to how we saw them implement realism mode for the 10-year anniversary update a few months back. For that, each time you booted out the game, you were prompted to choose whether you enter the normal base game or into realism mode. Choosing realism took you to a dedicated menu where you could then create your own separate realism characters. If that is the way that they're intending to roll out Survivors, then I think the conversation around how does this appeal to the wider gaming audience is incredibly relevant, given that it's likely to be marketed as a standalone experience rather than something that you need a lot of time and progress in the base Division 2 game to even experience or try out. But that also then takes you to the monetary conversation, right? Original Survival was paid, mostly as it was direct DLC for Division 1, but because of that, it drew in a smaller audience than being free to play, for example, might have garnered it. For Survivors, do they try going down the free route, especially if this is meant to be a new experience intended to attract a wider audience, or do you stick toward it being paid? We've seen that route taken with many notable recent extraction shooters launching at the $40 USD price point. It worked out for Arc Raiders, clearly, whereas with something like Marathon, just a couple of months after launch, you're seeing cries online for them to make all of, or at least part of the game free to access and try, simply in a bid to get more people in and playing. It's an interesting question and not an easy one to solve. One way or another, they're going to need to recoup dev costs. Again, this has its own dedicated team. Paying those people is not cheap. And so if not an upfront cost, then definitely expect for them to devise some kind of monetized element to the experience, whether that be in the form of Survivors exclusive cosmetics or something else. But once again, I think this is all kind of uncharted territory, with this being a piece of content releasing within the Division 2. It's not as easy as just saying, here's a new game, it's $40, because even if Survivors ends up having a comparable kind of scope and ambition to that, your everyday player out there is just going to here, they've added paid DLC for Division 2. And so, yeah, I'm very curious to see how they navigate that. The final thing that I then wanted to touch on, as I know that just by talking about this, there's going to be a flood of questions asking, okay, when is Survivors releasing? At this time, we do not know. What we do know is that in all recent communications for it, spanning the past few months, they have emphasized that this is in early development.
Yeah, Survivors is still in early development, which
And it was a mega early build.
And I played it this week. We had our third playable build. It's really shaping up. So it'll take the time that it takes, but I think we've got something super, super promising here.
That being said, testing on the mode has begun, and they confirmed that more closed tests are scheduled for this year. So where does that leave a potential release date? The issue that I see is that Survivors is a very seasonally tied content package, right? If you're launching this ultimate winterized extraction shooter in July, let's say, it's not like it would see no success, but it's just one of those things where if they were to launch it in November, let's say like the original Survival did, you capitalize on those seasonal themes in key markets like North America and Europe where winter is setting in. You get to grab the attention from the younger crowd who's going on break for holidays around that time. And bringing this all back around to the question of how does Survivors fare with the wider gaming audience as an extraction shooter launching in a post-Ark Raiders world, I think you have to admit that it has its best chances at drawing people in if you match its release to the appropriate time of year. So that would mean that they either need to have this thing out in the next 8 months, with January being the absolute latest that I would say you could still capitalize on the winter craze, or you're then potentially waiting well over a year until the cold begins to creep back in for winter 2027. And again, that's not to say that they can't launch at a different time of year, they absolutely can, and I will always advocate for things not being rushed out the door, let it cook for as long as it needs, but the release timing of this all, with the context in mind of what Survivors is shaping up to be and how it will be marketed, it's just one additional wrinkle, one that I'll be very interested to see how they handle. That is about all I've got for today. Y'all, I really just wanted to sit down and discuss some of my recent thought trains surrounding Survivors, given it has been a minute since we last had an update on it. It goes without saying that I'm very excited for this new Mode 2 release. I adored the original, and from what it sounds like, they're going all out to transform DC to be the ultimate winter playground. I can't wait. At this point, though, I would love to hear any and all of your guys' thoughts. How are you feeling about Survivors heading into May? What's your take on how it may be perceived and received by the wider gaming audience? What do you think about the release date timing? Do you think it is as important as I'm making it out to be that this launches within winter to match the game? Let me know. I'll be very curious to read all of your guys' thoughts. Before we close out, have to give a major shout out and thank you to our channel members. Your continuous generosity and support means more than you know, allows me to keep going on here. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, that's about everything for me, folks. Thank you all so much for coming by and watching, and until I see you next, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go!
And